The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a platform and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co. From 2001 to 2013, Steve Ridgway was the CEO for Virgin Atlantic. In this time, he saw Virgin Atlantic grow from 2 747s to a fleet of 40 aircrafts, flying 6 million passengers a year all over the world. Many consider Virgin Atlantic to be one of the world's most innovative airlines, having won top business, consumer, and trade awards. His career at Virgin Atlantic ended after 23 years. Why I wanted to interview him? Well, I've had the pleasure of meeting personally Richard Branson, and I'm a big, massive fan, like many people around the world. What he's managed to build and the amazing brand, and obviously being able to interview someone that worked so closely to Richard and someone that was really one of the driving forces of Virgin Atlantic was an amazing opportunity. As a CEO, it was very, very inspiring. So I'm sure you're going to enjoy the interview. Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Bernardo Moya, and welcome to Inspiring People. Today I'm here with Stephen Ridgway, who is the former CEO of Virgin Atlantic. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
Good to see you.
Thanks very much.
Bernardo.
Thanks for being here with us today.
Pleasure.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where you're from, where you were born?
I'm actually a West Country boy. I grew up in Devon. I was very lucky. My father was a farmer, so I often think I had a very privileged upbringing because it's just a wonderful way to grow up as a kid. You learn lots of things, you get taught lots of things, and I think it stood me in good stead for, ironically, lots of things that happened to me subsequently.
Brothers, sisters?
Yep, I've got 5 of us all together. I've got 3 sisters and a brother who's a little bit younger than me, and we still run a business together. So good, close family.
Brilliant. And what was school like?
I went to schools quite locally in one part of mid Devon and then down near the south coast, and I enjoyed it. And certainly the school I went to down near Salcombe, I used to love the summers because we had a very active sailing club, and I used to spend as much time as I could sailing on the estuary in Salcombe. So that was pretty fantastic.
Any subjects in particular that you liked or you enjoyed or struggled with?
It was funny. I was never really that strong on the science side and the technical side, and yet, ironically, my life has been very much around inventing things and wanting to build things, and so I guess I was intuitively quite good at it, but maybe I either didn't work hard enough or just wasn't quite technical enough, so that's been a bit strange, but no, I think I was across the board was okay. Like everybody at that age, probably should have worked harder.
Mm-hmm. And after school, what did you do?
I did an economics degree when I left school, and then straight after that, I went and did a graduate sales management program, working for. Actually, my career has been around working for some big names, funnily enough, and I went to work for Sir James Goldsmith, or Jimmy Goldsmith as he was in those days. He had this big food group called Cavenham. It doesn't exist now, but it was a very successful big group, and I worked for him for 3 years and did this graduate sales management program, which I think has stood me in fantastic stead for the rest of my life. It doesn't matter whether you're in business selling or what you're doing. I think having those skills, and it is quite a science, does, whether you're buying a house, selling a car, negotiating at work, I found it fantastic, and you don't really realise what skills you're picking up, but they've certainly been with me in most of my subsequent career.
Selling is very, very important.
I think we all sell, don't we? We sell ourselves, we sell ourselves to our partners. As I said, we buy houses, and some people sell as a career.
So after that, I believe the company got sold, and then what happened then?
No, Cavenham went on. I was very young, actually. I kind of skipped a year's school, and in those days you didn't do gap years, and that was a bit silly. So I was I've been working with them quite a long time, and I was still in my very early 20s, and I got promoted quite quickly and then kind of hit a bit of a brick wall, and I thought, well, time for a change. So actually I went back and did a postgrad course for a year, and then I did some teaching and lecturing for 3 years, and I was teaching economics and politics, history, that sort of stuff. And that was very good experience, because you have to stand up in front of people, you have to be articulate, you have to be able to motivate them, you have to make them be interested in what you're talking about and in learning. And again, I think that was a skill that you pick up and develop. You have to be very fast on your feet and the way you think. And so I did that for more than 3 years, and then I think the call of the private sector came back again, and I was a bit disappointed with some of the politics that was going on in teaching, and I could see the writing on the wall. So I went back into industry, and that was the beginning of the pathway that's led me right through to Virgin.
Was there anybody in particular at your early years, or when you were that inspired you then?
I've had a couple of really important mentors who've helped me with my career. They're probably not big household names, but they were very successful businessmen in their own right. One of them, sadly, is not here anymore, but the other I'm still very much in touch with. And I think when you are young and if you're ambitious and you want to do things, having people who are that bit older than you and can help guide you and push you has been enormously useful. And I'm hugely grateful for them for the way they kind of nurtured me and looked after me. And they were very successful businessmen, and there was a lot to learn from them.
Yeah, we always encourage people, to find a mentor, or really go out and look for a possible mentor, because they can guide them very importantly throughout their life and career. Yeah,
and I agree with that, and I say that to lots of people as well. I think that the other thing I would add to that is that in today's global world, the other thing that I tell everyone is that you've really got to go and work overseas now. We know you're no longer competing for jobs in the UK. You're not even competing in Europe, are you? You're competing globally. And I went and lived in America for 4 years, and still very comfortable over there. And of course, I've travelled a huge amount with the main job I've had. But 2 of my kids are living in the States now, and even if you come back, I think it's just very important to become part of the global village.
And that was at that time when the private sector called you again. And is that when you went off to Miami, was it?
Yes, I was working for quite a flamboyant entrepreneur called Ted Tolman. He had a very successful, car delivery business that was based in Essex. They were the number 1 car delivery company in the country, delivering all the cars from Ford factories and from VW. They were obviously being imported from Germany and even British Leyland in those days. And he had a very successful business, and he liked lots of different sports, and he was very into motor racing. We set up a Formula One team. We brought Ayrton Senna into Formula One, which very few people remember. He got stolen off us in about 3 months by Lotus when they saw just how quick he was. But the first Formula One drive that he did was in the Tolman Formula One team, and I was part of working for that. And he very nearly won a race in the first season in Monaco in the rain, and the race got stopped a lap early because Alain Prost was leading, and the French didn't want this upstart Brazilian to win this race in this very unknown car. Yeah, so Ted Tolman was very interested in that, ran a Formula One team. He also did a lot of offshore powerboat racing, and there was this company based on the south coast called Cougar Marine that was very successful. It was building these offshore powerboats that were way quicker than anything else the Americans were building. And Ted did a bit of a Remington. He what was that guy called? Victor Khayyam, and he so liked the company that he bought it. So he bought Cougar Marine, and then I went off to open up and run their factory in Miami, in North Miami Beach, which was sort of powerboat alley. And I was out there for nearly 4 years with my beginning of my young family. And in fact, that's why one of my daughters was born out in Miami. So she has an American passport and is now living in New York and about to marry an American, amazingly.
Not a bad place, Miami.
Yeah. So that was a very, very good experience. Yeah. And I travelled all over the country when we were attending races and doing lots of business there.
So what was your role there within the company?
I was the general manager of the plant. So again, I suppose I was running the whole thing, and I was responsible for the design and development of the products. We obviously had designers who did the detailed design, but we were building these race boats. They were being designed in the UK. We were building pleasure boats, and I was very much part of the marketing and selling of those boats. And we had a very strong name at that time because we were winning every year. We were winning the World Offshore Powerboat Championship, which is like the Formula One of powerboating.
Was it then during that, when you were working there, is that when you met Sir Richard Branson then originally?
Yeah, well, what happened was we had this particular design of boats that was being very successful in the leisure markets, and we thought that they would they could work and be very appropriate in the commercial markets and military markets, and particularly small, fast patrol boats, because they were very stable and they turned well, and you could keep pop away. And so we thought, well, we had to try and introduce this hull form, this design, into the commercial and military markets. And one of the owners of the company was, again, quite a flamboyant character, and he said, why don't we build a boat and we'll go and break the famous old liner record from the US, from New York to Land's End, or to the Scilly Isles, which was the famous blue ribbon, which countries had all through the 20s and 30s and even into the 40s had competed who had the fastest way of getting across the Atlantic, obviously before jet aircraft. It was liners, and countries competed. The French competed against the British, against the Americans, against the Germans, against the Italians, and it was a very, very famous record before aircraft came along. And actually the record was last broken in, I think, 1953 by the Americans. They built this beautiful ship, still around actually, the SS United States, and it was all built very light and specially built to break the blue ribbon record. And she came across the Atlantic in the early 50s at nearly 37 knots. And that record had stood all the way from then until we went out in 1985-86 and broke it. And so we designed the boat. I started building it with the team actually down at Hamble on the south coast. And then Richard had just started Virgin Atlantic, literally about 6 weeks before. And he realised that he couldn't really afford to publicise this new airline in the States, to be just flying from London to New York. It was fearfully expensive to advertise on US television, even in those days. And he thought, well, why don't I sponsor this project, sponsor this craft, and see if I can get some publicity from that. So the boat was named Virgin Atlantic Challenger, and we set off after much humming and hawing in 1985, got within 130 miles of the Scilly Isles, and then sank. And we got fished out the drink by a helicopter and winched off and taken back to Scilly Isles, where we said, damn it, we'll do it again. So the next winter we built another boat, and in 1986 we did actually break the record. We had a pretty difficult crossing, and there was all sorts of problems with the fuel, and we were stopped in the water for 12 hours, but we did break the record. And I think that pretty much put Richard on the map as a household name. I mean, he was well known in the music industry before that, but I mean, we literally, at every weather forecast, they had a little picture of the boat going, well, here they are now, and here they are now, they're still going. And there was huge publicity over it. And of course, he then went on to do all his ballooning exploits and so on, and began to become who he is today. But it was certainly a fan, and going back to sort of life and experience, it was a fantastic experience for me, because I guess I'd had a good upbringing, probably a fairly comfortable upbringing. There'd been obviously no wars, had there since 1945, and then suddenly to go and do something that was quite edgy and quite dangerous in racing this boat across the Atlantic day and night, and charging 55 knots in the middle of the Atlantic, not being able to see anything, debris, bits of iceberg, whatever it might be. So that was very good, I think, just to that privation and that danger. And then I came back and I set up a company with Che Blythe, actually, to do some round-the-world yacht racing, match racing, which, again, was the same thing. All these people suddenly really wanted to go and pit themselves against the element and do that. And that was a very successful business for Che. And I helped him for 2 or 3 years. And then, by then, several of the team from the Virgin Atlantic Challenger project had gone and worked for Virgin Atlantic. And then Richard said to me, we were pretty good friends by then, and families the same age. And he said to me, look, there's all sorts of stuff happening at the airline. Would you like to come and help with a few things? And that was sort of 1987, something like that. And I freelanced for a couple of years and then formally joined the airline in 1989.
If you're interested in working with me, contributing to the magazine, maybe speaking at any of our many events around the world, partnering or licensing The Best You, go to www.thebestyou.co. And quite a journey with Virgin Atlantic. I mean, obviously looking at it from the outside and looking at how where it was and where it is today. Tell me, how was it?
Yeah, I mean, when I joined, we had 2 aircraft and we were just flying to Miami and New York. And then it just started growing and growing. And we had these amazing bursts of growth at different times. We had equally tough periods when things like 9/11 came along and Gulf Wars. But no, it was a fantastic thing to take the company from 2 aircraft to where it is today with 40 aircraft. I mean, remember, it's only a long-haul airline. It doesn't fly any small aircraft. That's not quite true. Just a little operation just started to feed traffic into Heathrow. But essentially, the business is about being a long-haul carrier. So we run wide-body aircraft and fly 6 million people a year, and company's a £3 billion company now. So, and it's not, although it's called Virgin Atlantic, it's a global business now. It flies all over the world: Africa, Middle East, India, Far East, Australia, and of course, big operation into the US and the Caribbean and places like that.
Especially when you started with 2 planes, I mean, a lot of people will probably be familiar with the British Airways and the situation you had with them and them not competing very fairly. So tell me a bit about that period and how that worked out.
Yeah, I mean, I think history had been legendary in that there were just dozens of airlines, and it's the nature of the industry and probably the nature of many industries that you get all the small guys that come and go, they try, they don't make it. You'd had Freddie Laker, who had been very successful, but again, he got attacked by BA, and that was another famous case where he did ultimately get compensated, but after the airline had closed. And I think Virgin faced the same challenges, and we had a slightly different business model to many of the others, to the Dan Airs, to the Air Europes, to the Lakers. And I think with just force of personality and by being very aggressive and very challenging in our marketing and the way we looked after customers, we were able to prevail, and we were appealing both to business travellers and to leisure travellers. And we began to build a very strong brand, and we began to build a brand around really looking after customers. I mean, airlines before that were largely, when we started, airlines were still either owned by governments, they were arms of governments. So Air France was the French airline, Lufthansa was the German airline, British Airways was the UK airline. I think British Airways had just been privatised, but they were essentially still the flag carriers of the country, and they were run by their operational departments, by their technical departments, and they didn't really like passengers very much. They were annoying and turned up late, etc. Whereas I think Virgin knew from the beginning that we brought in very good people to run the airline technically, make sure that we were fully compliant with a very complex regulatory regime, but we were going to make it a marketing business and a brand business. And that's where I had the empathy with Richard, and Richard had the empathy with me around it was going to be around the people, and it was going to be around the product and the service and how we did things differently. And I think that goes right back to the farm, that if you grow up on a farm, you have to be very innovative and you have to be very intuitive about reacting to things. And I think those 2 things came together in driving this agenda at Virgin Atlantic, which Richard enjoyed. He loved being different, doing things differently. And that formula has worked all the way through and enabled us to get to where we are today. Why
is Virgin such a loved or, admired brand in many ways? What's your take on that?
Well, I think it goes back to that point that it's been about building a business for consumers and addressing consumers' needs, whatever the segment's been. I think Richard has liked the whole taking on David and Goliath. So it was taking on BA and actually making BA a better airline. It was about taking on the big telecom companies, the mobile companies, and creating a funky mobile brand. It's been, even in the rail space, it's been about getting away from that old culture of British Rail and creating a brand that is different, and that is largely around people. And I think he with his management teams and with people he's put in businesses, maybe like me, has been able to, and it's quite ephemeral, I don't know, it's very hard to pin down. You get asked this question all the time, but we seem to be able to attract and motivate and keep people really loyal to the companies they work for. And travel is a tough business and a tough segment. You don't earn fortunes in travel. And yet we have got and had amazing staff at Virgin Atlantic over the years. And sometimes we had to put the brakes on a bit, like after 9/11, and people would leave. And we had at least 2 redundancy programs during my time there, and that's never easy to deal with. You have to do it quickly and humanely and not damage the company. And then people would go away and they get other experience and they come back and they go, you know, when we were here, we didn't realise that actually this is a really great place to work. So it's fascinating how you bottle that up and what it really is. And maybe that's one of the things for me to think about a bit more now. I've got more time, but you're always on a charge. But it's certainly been there, and we've kept it all the time. We're very conscious of the staff.
I would like to ask you a couple more questions about Richard, but I can't even imagine as a CEO, as a general manager, as an MD, running an airline. Just explain to me kind of the daily process of staff, airports, planes. Tell me kind of a day-to-day.
Well, it is a very complex business, but I guess a lot of businesses are very complex, aren't they? I mean, making cars is pretty complex. But I think at one level, it's pretty simple. You are creating a proposition. You are creating a promise that you're going out to the market with. You're advertising your brand. You're making sure it's distributed through whatever the selling channels are. If it was a car company, it would be dealerships. In our case, it was a combination of directly through the internet and through a whole lot of travel agents and specialist distributors. And so you're making that promise about where you fly, how you're going to look after people, and how much you're going to charge them. So that's the selling and marketing and brand side of the business. So it makes a promise. And then on the other side, you have a massive operational department which delivers everything. It finds pilots and trains them. It finds cabin crew and trains them. It trains airport staff. It trains engineers. And then you make sure that you have a fleet of aircraft that are suitably fitted out with the right cabins and configurations for leisure passengers, for business passengers, whatever it is. And you put that whole package together. But it is a massive matrix of complexity. But essentially it's around a marketing and selling machine that is making promises, and then another part of the business that is delivering those promises. And I think if you deliver those promises and you deliver them well, that's how you get your reputation, and you get a virtuous circle, because people, I mean, word of mouth is the most powerful vehicle for, I think, any company. And if you've got a strong word of mouth and you've got a strong repeat business, people talking about it, you're halfway there. But you're only as good as your last flight. And that's, I think, the same with many businesses. And that's why you see businesses go over the top and start to go down and fail. And I think certainly all the time I was at Virgin Atlantic, we were continually reinventing the business. We weren't losing the core values, but we were continually reinventing it and modernising it and trying to keep it up there front of mind with consumers. And that's why, you know, some of the famous television advertising that Virgin Atlantic's known for, it kind of just set that resonance with consumers. They might not even be flying on Virgin Atlantic that particular time, or maybe even for a year, but it's just there in people's minds. So, if I'm going to New York, I'm definitely going to look at Virgin Atlantic. I might not necessarily go on it, might be other choices, but it's going to be on my shopping list, and that's what you have to do.
And you covered it previously in your answer, but obviously it's about attracting the right people and keeping them. But I think that's been one of Richard's key things, hasn't it, over the years, is just being able to attract the right people and put them in the right positions.
Yeah, I mean, he is... I think so many companies are faceless. They might have big names and big brands, but if you have a face and a personality, it somehow makes it much more real, doesn't it? I mean, look at Steve Jobs at Apple and so on. And so, I mean, Richard hasn't done the work as such. I mean, he hasn't been involved in the day-to-day running of Virgin Atlantic for a very long time, and probably even at the beginning he wasn't really. But he has been a beacon for the staff, and he has been a beacon for customers. And that's great, because that's very powerful.
In your opinion, what does it take to be a leader? How are leaders made?
Well, I guess there's two types, aren't there? There's a sort of the old, very autocratic types, and I'm not sure they exist very much now. And I read a very amusing thing the other day that apparently when the Duke of Wellington became Prime Minister, which he did after, 10 years after the Battle of Waterloo, he said he went to he said, I went to my first cabinet meeting and I gave all the ministers their orders. And then, amazingly, they wanted to sit around and discuss them. So I think there's that kind of leadership, isn't there? And then I think there's leadership around building a really high-performing team and being, in many ways, much more consensual. You still need to be a leader, but I think you have to I don't think when you have a very big company of the size that Virgin Atlantic was, and there's many companies much, much bigger, that a CEO can do everything. They can be the visionary, they can make sure the strategy's on track, but ultimately you need a very high-performing team of different capabilities. And that's the point, is you're not trying to build people in your own image. I hated it if I ever came across managers who were threatened by people coming up through the organisation and felt they were at risk from some bright spark that was coming up. I think that's a terrible trait in a manager. You should always respect that. I mean, there were many, many people in Virgin Atlantic that were much more talented and much cleverer than I ever was. But it's about how you build the team and about how you make sure that there are all the relevant skill sets. I mean, I knew very clearly what my strengths and weaknesses were, and I wanted everybody else to be the same. And people in a top team need to be very honest and say, I know you're really good at that, so we'll make sure that's what you focus on. But equally, I'm good at organisational design or whatever it might be. And so I think one of the roles of a CEO, when you have people who are also ambitious and probably also competing, is to deal with the sort of collateral damage that goes on when you do have tension in teams and you've got people competing. But if you've got that managed well, then you have a very powerful organism. And I think if you dumb organisations down through being very bureaucratic or very autocratic, then I don't think you get the best out of people. Not that enjoyable place to work for. We gave people huge ability to make decisions, and but they had to be accountable at the same time. So there was a lot of empowerment, but at the same time you have to have accountability.
What would you say over the years, reviewing your career, your best assets have been?
I think probably my innate creativity, and that goes right back to what I said at the very beginning, is that I just like challenging the status quo. I like to think there are always ways to do things differently. And it's not about spending more money. The things that I really like most are if you can come up with an idea to do something that actually is better and customers and consumers love it, and it's more efficient and saves you money. And we bought drive-through check-ins into aviation. Wasn't a new idea. McDonald's had drive-through check-ins for years, so we stole the idea of them, if you like. But equally, it meant passengers loved the fact that they could just check in the car and go straight through the airport, didn't have to go and check in conventionally. And of course, that meant we needed fewer check-in desks at the airport, which saved us money because if you like, the drive-through space was cheaper than the very expensive desks in the airport terminal. So, and that was we always had many, many more ideas than we could ever practically implement or practically justify. But I liked always challenging and trying to come up with the new ideas and doing things differently. And I think that's what consumers like. And that's one reason why Apple's been so successful, hasn't it? That it's always surprised and delighted people. And I have views about research, for example, that when people say, well, you've got to go off and research what consumers want. I don't think you do, because I don't think consumers know what they don't know. And if I asked you 10 years ago whether you'd have wanted half the things on your iPhone today, you'd have said, oh, no, I don't need that, I just need a phone. So I think companies have to be visionary and they have to push ideas. Yes, go and validate them through research. Go and see, actually, is it going to work? Do consumers want it? But I could tell you so many stories about things that we put into research that consumers said, oh, no, we don't want that. And then we did it anyway. And then they went, wow, we love this.
If you're interested in watching the video content of this interview and many others, or interested in learning from world leaders and teachers, go to www.thebestyou.online. Now, as we said, I mean, the world has changed and it's changing so much and so quickly. I mean, we look at the Googles, the Amazon and the Apples of this world, and they weren't around, just a few years ago. What do you think the best assets are or skill sets for people who are interested in going into business or entrepreneurship? What would your advice be?
Well, I think we live in an amazing world in terms of opportunity and what you can do. I mean, you just look at some of the businesses that pop up all over the place. And the ones that really annoy me is when you suddenly find a business and you go, oh, bloody hell, why didn't I think of that? And, like the little Halo company, the new taxi cab app. I mean, absolutely brilliant. So simple, using a lot of cabbies' dead miles, so the cabbies love it. Customers love it because they can find taxis much more easily. You can jump out of the cab without having to pay because it's all on your app, etc. And you think, blimey, why didn't I think of that? And it was 3 cabbies and 3 programmers. So I think there are unlimited opportunities out there. I think the only issue, and this is why I think brands are important, is there is so much stuff out there and there is such information overload, is how do you cut through the clutter? How do you come up through the blancmange? And therefore, having sponsors or having mentors or allying yourselves to brands that can help you punch above your weight is very important. Because I'm sure today out there are probably hundreds, thousands of companies that have got great businesses, but getting that inertia and getting your head above the parapet is very challenging. And I think that's one of the roles of some of the big companies. And I think some of them do it very well, don't they, in terms of nurturing and incubating new businesses. But I think if you've got the drive and the ambition, there's still every bit of as good opportunity out there as there's ever been. It's just different.
Talking about opportunities, what kind of opportunities do you think the future holds in the next, 4 or 5 years? What
for me or generally?
In general, yeah.
I think it will just be this blending of the digital world we live in with actually the real world. I think everyone thinks the whole world can become digital and that's where we'll go. But actually, a shirt is pretty analog, and at some point you have to touch it and feel it and wear it. And I think there's probably a bit of a digital overreaction at the moment. You think everything can be digital and it can't. And I'm quite fascinated that there can be a sort of an analog recovery, but pushed on the back of digital, distribution, advertising, whatever it might be. And I think it's interesting how some of the old retro brands, for example, are being relaunched. So I think there is going to be this fascinating merging between, you can make aviation as digital as you like in terms of how it's communicated and how it's marketed, but at some point you physically have to go to an airport, don't you, and get on a plane. So there is a kind of 3D world as well as a 2D world. And I think we seem to be all being swept along with the digital revolution, but ultimately it comes back to going to a restaurant and having a meal or checking into a hotel and sleeping in a bed, doesn't it? So a lot of those other principles and values are very much still there. It's just about how you blend them. And I think it's the people who are blending them smartly that have great opportunities going forward now.
We obviously recommend people to read and to permanently reinvent themselves, through reading courses and all sorts of things. Well, what's your thoughts regarding education? Having taught and being that uni, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you never stop learning, and I think it probably depends a little bit on your psyche about are you going to learn on the job and just by being alert and aware and watching television. Everyone's rude about television and people sitting in front of it, but there is amazing stuff and amazing learning from television or reading newspapers, whatever it might be. Or you carry on with more formal education and studying. I think my career was very much about learn as you go, and it's interesting for me now that I've kind of slowed down for a minute that you can kind of look back and go, well, why did I do that, and what was really going on? Sort of post-rationalising what you've done is often quite useful. I think stepping back occasionally and going, what's really going on here? I remember looking at a case study that INSEAD did on Virgin Atlantic. They did one the first 10 years and then the next 10 years, and I went over and adjudicated it a couple of times. And it was fascinating that they'd taken what we did and put it back into a sort of academic framework or an academic framework. And it looks as if we've been incredibly smart and incredibly scientific about all the things that we've done, and taking this textbook off the shelf and that textbook off the shelf. And of course, we hadn't done that at all, really. It was all quite intuitive. But it could all be post-rationalised back into some theory and some learnings. And so I think you either learn the skills first and then go and do it, or you do it the hard way like I did and Richard did, which is you kind of learn on the job. And I suppose it depends what your makeup is, really. But there's certainly, I think there's a good blend of the two.
Society in general, the economy, the world economy, things are changing, and they have changed in the last few years. What are your thoughts regarding society, the global economy?
I just think we are in in the developed countries, we are in an absolute catch-22 in that we're incredibly privileged. We have, whatever happens, we have a great lifestyle, don't we? We have pretty good education system, we have a great health system, we have good roads, we have good trains, whatever you might call it. And yet somehow it hasn't been enough, has it? And we've both corporately, at a government level, and even individually, we've all lived beyond our means and run up these absolutely ridiculous levels of debt. And I don't blame people looking in from the developing countries and saying, why should we help? You've had it all your own way for however long it's been, and yet you've been too greedy and too difficult. And I think until we get that balance back in the economy about, what is the size of the public sector that the private sector can support, then I think we're in danger of just throttling the economy all the time. And I think that's why you've got sclerotic rates of growth in the UK, same in Europe, because unless you can give enterprise its head and let it create enough wealth, there's enough surplus that you can then do the right things with whatever it is, with education, with welfare, with all these other things. It's just, how big do you want the pie to be? I mean, is it like now, is the government 45 or 50% of an economy this size, or is it 30% of an economy this size? And that's, I think, the decision we have to make. And I think there's more and more evidence now that if we let the public sector get much bigger than it is today and much bigger than it has been, then it just strangles the economy. And there seems to be this magic quotient, doesn't there, about 40% of GDP is public sector. It seems to work. Once it goes above that, the economy seems to struggle. And but that's tough, and there's some hard decisions. But politicians, unfortunately, they live for 5 years, don't they, in terms of their life cycles, and it makes it very hard to make very long right decisions. Look at the Heathrow debacle in terms of we've got the number one hub in the world, and yet we won't do anything about it, and we'll just let it atrophy and go away. So, tricky.
Yes, very tricky. What drives you now? What does the future hold?
I don't exactly know, actually, but I have got tons of energy. I never stop, and I'm not going to do another probably big full-time executive role. But I would like to use hopefully some of the learnings that I have and some of the wisdom I have to, do some advisory roles or some non-exec roles. And so, I'm talking to some businesses where, and I think it probably is around building brands and brand propositions and making sure that whatever you do stand out from the rest, and that you are trying to be different, you are trying to be innovative. So we'll see. I've got a couple of little businesses with my brother, sort of private family businesses, which are pretty successful. We've got a very lovely hotel down the West Country that we built a few years ago, and it's kind of right up there now in the rankings, just near Padstow. And so, I've got plenty to occupy me, and I like building projects, and I'm always doing houses, and I think I might go back. Probably like to go back and buy a farm, actually, if the truth's known. My sort of farming roots are coming back to me again. But it'd be I remember my dad always saying that it's very nice owning a little chunk of England. Even if you don't own it for very long, maybe you're renting it, but you do, it's your little chunk. So I can feel that a bit calling. So maybe go and become a sort of farmer.
You just mentioned about brands. What brands do you admire now globally?
I mean, there's lots in the technical area, a couple of which we've already talked about, the Apples of the world, the Samsungs. I think aviation brands have become much stronger than they were, probably driven a lot by what Virgin Atlantic did with brands. So, I mean, you've obviously got Virgin Atlantic, you've got Cathay Pacific, you've got the emerging brands in the Middle East, Emirates and so on. So they are shaking up aviation. I think British Airways has gone through many, many changes to become what it is. So there are some big brands out there. I think the what the supermarket chains do is absolutely remarkable when you look at the whole logistics and the way they drive those businesses. And of course the car brands are pretty legendary as well, aren't they? And it's fascinating when you look at the big three German brands about how they all make pretty much identical cars, and yet they've got hugely loyal segments. If you're a Merc man, you're a Merc man, or an Audi man, and it's extraordinary because, I mean, essentially the cars are all the same, aren't they? 2-litre diesels or whatever, and yet they've been able to build this set of values and principles so that once you're a BMW person, you probably keep buying BMWs. So it is a fascinating science, I think.
Definitely. What do you read, Steve? What do you tend to read?
I probably don't read as many books as I should. I guess I've been very busy and not done that. But I do keep up a lot with the newspapers and some of the periodicals and stuff like that. So I try to keep myself quite tech savvy. I wouldn't say I'm as good as I should be. But maybe I'll get a bit more time to do some reading now. I'm a bit of a maniac, but if I find a book I really like, I will suddenly read it from cover to cover and stay up to 4 o'clock in the morning and wonder why I'm very tired the next day. So I'm probably not a very balanced reader. But I hope I'll get a bit more time to read some of the great stories and novels that are either already out there or keep emerging.
Brilliant. And my last question, if you could give yourself any advice now to a younger version of you, what would it be?
I think I would have worked harder at school, and I probably, I think, while I wasn't that bright, I probably, with a bit more effort, I could have got a little bit further just academically than I did. And then, but I think, maybe I caught up in the end, I don't know. And then the other thing, I probably would step back a bit and try and think through a bit more in terms of life's plan and where you want to go. I guess I'm quite a pragmatic individual, and I've always been full charge. So I've kind of just gone with the flow and gone with the direction. And I've only really ever had one job interview in my life, which is quite remarkable. So things just happened and emerged, and this opportunity or that opportunity. And maybe I could have been a bit more scientific about where I really wanted my career path to go. I think man is naturally restless, and I kind of look back now and think, oh God, I could have done so much more and I could have been so much better. But whether I'm just being selfish or fussy, I don't know.
I think you are. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for watching Inspiring People. Thank you.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.